This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 5 amazing individuals. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, and Michael Fritchie. If you want to support the show, you can become a patron at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Well, welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me Natalie.
Hi.
And Natalie's friend, who is the...
Ungooglable Michelangelo.
Is that because it's hard to Google you?
It's complicated. It's the paradox of ungoogleability. So by being ungooglable, the ungooglable Michelangelo becomes googleable. Because if you just look up Michelangelo, it's going to be Ninja Turtles and Renaissance artists all the way down. But that's Michelangelo, which is a common misconception. And I'm Michelangelo, like the Ninja Turtle. Cowabunga.
Oh, okay. All right. That works.
Yeah.
I know you have a podcast.
I do.
Which is called...
Self-Portraits as Other People.
Okay. And what's the theme there?
Well, the tagline that I use is where the limits of language meet the fringes of reality, which is similar to the idea of ungoogleability. Like, of course, there's the element of you can't Google it, but it's also something to be ungoogleable. It's unquantifiable. It's unspeakable. It's kind of off the charts. It's kind of like, where did the road go, you know?
Right.
Kind of leads you into that unspeakable territory, but I like what happens when you push language to its limits, and you kind of push it against these translinguistic realms and see how it behaves, how wildly it starts to flail and adapt itself. Can it fly? Is it going to falter and fail? Like,
it usually falters and fails, I think.
It can, but I think there's ways to... I mean, you might not be able to wrap your mind around it, but you can warp your mind around it. Like, you have to somehow allow the language to rewild itself in order to get to these, like, through the trickster territory. So that's where, like, tongue twisters and riddles and rhymes and wordplay and things like that come in, which are things that I like to use for these investigations a lot of times.
Okay. So tell us a little about your history. Where do you come from?
Where do I hail from? I'm from the Netherlands, which is a little country in Europe, on the west coast of Europe, where they don't talk like this necessarily. They probably talk a little bit more like this, but I grew up in front of the television with lots of American programming, and I had a talent for mimicry, so I picked it up, and now I'm kind of a stand-up chameleon. I go around with a neutral American accent. But I moved to the States around the year 2000, originally because I was aspiring to be a filmmaker.
Oh, okay. And
then around like 2001, I was going to move to New York, of all places, to study film. I was spending time there. A friend of mine was living there, and he was studying film, so I'd help him produce projects. But then that thing happened with the towers and the planes, and...
Yeah, that thing.
History kind of got rerouted, more so than I knew at the time. It seemed like, I remember a girlfriend at the time called me up and said, turn on the news, and I turned on the TV, and there was the Pentagon on fire, and I was like, it was just something on TV for me. It was something happening somewhere else to other people, but looking back at it, that was a pivotal moment where history and my personal history got rerouted.
Yeah.
I fell in love for the first time. I was starting to work with psychedelics, or had an interest in psychedelics, and that kind of married itself to my art. I started like drawing and painting a lot more. I was always a writer, but I went on this psychedelic detour where I moved away from film for the longest time, and my focus was more on painting and writing, and then music started coming into it. There was like this exploration of all the different sensual modalities, expressive modalities, and then eventually like film kind of brought it together again, because it's where you can combine all these different things.
What have you done film-wise?
I've made some short films. I've made some kind of narrative music videos. I've acted in things. I was living in Los Angeles for about 5 years, like finally, after 10 years of living in the Bay Area and doing all kinds of, like, having, like, bands and storytelling performances and all these different things, I realized I was living very close to LA, which was, the reason I had come to this country was to do film. So I'd always had this idea that if I would live there, it would be a terrible experience. I feared LA, and I thought, like, especially being an actor, like, you going there, you're a nobody aspiring to be somebody and, like, begging for a break or something.
Yeah.
So that's what kept me away from it for all that time. But everything else I was doing, like, reached a certain point where I couldn't push it further, and everything was kind of screaming from beyond that threshold, like, do it, give it a try it out, So I moved there, and then I lived in fear. I went to the place I feared, and I ended up, I was a dead soldier for a living at one point in Westworld.
Oh.
But the cool thing about that...
Like the TV series?
The TV series.
Nice.
But here's the cool thing about it. Like, it seems like that's not, like, a career point I'm not proud of. Like, I was a dead soldier in Westworld.
No, you were in Westworld. That's enough.
But it gets better, because the episode I was in was the first season's finale, and the title of the episode was The Bicameral Mind. And I am... That's right. Julian Jaynes, who wrote... I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
I have it in the back.
He wrote The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which I read for the first time when I was 19, and it has been, like, a very pivotal part of my thinking, my worldview, my creative work. And so it, like, through this, like, very menial job, it's somehow, like, synchronized with this larger interest, and in a way, like, cemented that link even further. And that's been something that's come back in the last few years. Like, I had Marcel Kauston, who is the founder of the Julian Jaynes Foundation, on my show recently, and we got to, like, really delve into the theory that Julian Jaynes had, the, like, fourfold thesis, the misconceptions around it, and things like that. So it's really, like, reintegrated itself and shown me what a foundation of thinking in my work that has been.
We've touched on this show. I read it about the same age, and it had the opposite effect on me. I did not like his work at all.
At all.
I thought he was kind of how can I put it? Like he was looking at primitive people as lesser. Like they couldn't tell the difference between their inner voice and their gods. And I felt like that's not how that works.
I would suggest to revisit it, because maybe, like, you've absorbed a lot more experience. I'm sure.
Right.
Because I don't think it was that simple. Like, to give it in a nutshell for people that are listening that aren't familiar with his theory. Well, first he takes, like, 60 pages to define consciousness as he views it, which, to boil it down to a very simplified term, would be like subjective interiority, or something you can introspect upon. And he paints this picture of basically, as language evolved, and especially metaphors for the physical behavioral world, so too this inner space, which is a metaphorical mind space, evolved, through which we're able to look at ideas and look at thoughts as if they were objects. So that comes also with an analog of yourself, almost like the body's hallucination of itself, that lives in your analog I, or metaphor me, as he calls it. But he proposes that there was a time before we had this subjective consciousness, which he calls the bicameral era, when we had a bicameral or two-chambered mind, where one side of the brain would basically cast a voice, a hallucinated voice, in a sort of hierarchy of, like, the gods, or your parents, or your overseers, or the king, or whatever it was. So, like, there was a critical moment where men and women were persons of action. That's who you were. There was not, like, a conceptual thinking element to yourself that could, in the same sense that animals aren't, like, they might be thinking on some level, but they don't have, like, a symbolical sense of self
where they're casting themselves into the future or into the past or trying to solve these problems. And so when there would be like this critical junction where a decision needed to be made, the God part of the brain, the one side of the brain, would spring up and would give the solution. And then as civilization complexified, these control systems were no longer able to keep all the pieces moving. And then with the advent of writing, the voice was able to be transposed onto like tablets, legislature, where the voice doesn't have control over you the same way. Because when you read something, the voice comes from the tablet or comes from the surface of the paper, and there's like you don't have to obey it. But that also left us at this place where, how are we going to make decisions? So then like divination comes into play, for instance, as a way to kind of divine the nature of the gods, the will of the gods,
Okay, all right.
So I don't think he thought of them as lesser, but I think there is an issue in...
Well, less involved.
Well, I mean, but that's the nature of evolution, isn't it?
But
to some degree.
I think when you're looking at that time period, you're looking at the recovery of civilization from something more evolved.
But the opposite of that would be to look back, and you get kind of a Flintstones model where you look back at like the caveman as the modern Stone Age family, where they have the same faculties that we did.
Well, but we are finding more and more that they did have concepts of like life after death and things like that.
At a certain point, I think that because there was a time when there were no marked tombstones, and that's like one of the examples that James gives too, that at some point we started marking graves, and that's where like a shift happens in the personification. And I mean, I think there were probably superstitious elements and like dream elements maybe and mythological elements even before that time, but I'm not schooled enough to really be able to comment on that.
Natalie, did you find what you were looking for?
Well, I was just looking for, how we met, and I did find some things. So that was...
Because you said it was very synchronistic.
I felt that it was. It was a chance meeting.
Literally, right?
Yeah, because this was back in 2018, and I got an email out of the blue. I'm not sure where this person found me. Social media, I assume. I don't know what precipitated it, but it was this mysterious... I don't know. The content was odd. It was just sort of like this person who was into chaos magic, I think, and they were just kind of cryptic messages with little pieces of art. And the name that showed up on the display name was Chance Fate. And there were things in the email that there were like 3 different things that I Googled, I think, or at least 2. And one of them led me directly to you, and I remember seeing your art, and it was what was the piece that I don't remember the title.
It was a piece called Elephantitis, which is like kind of a fictitious psychically transmitted disease, a PSTD, if you will.
Okay.
The image is of this almost like monkey-like, elf-like portrait with these like fluttering trinity of stacked eyes, which was a vision that had come to me in the Amazon when I sat with the Yagua tribe and drank something that was said to be yahe but not ayahuasca, which is a strange thing because it's supposed to be the same thing. It was a singular plant. In hindsight, it was probably Toei or Datura.
Okay.
And so this was like the one thing, one vision, quote unquote, that I was able to take out of that and turn into an art piece. And then Natalie commented on that piece specifically because it looked like the characters
dream
that you
entities.
had, the dream entities that you had been chronicling for like
strange,
decades.
Yeah. It was very remarkably similar. And then I think you started talking about like the Gelfling sort of link and
the lemur,
and then the lemurs were what
element.
came up next, and I was like that's absolutely wild because I went through a period of like I want to say like 4 years where I was getting like this really powerful lemur symbolism in my dreams. These strange little lemurs would show up and lead me to, unfortunately I don't have the notes in front of me, but it was like sort of back and forth, both in future and past kind of reflections, for want of a better word. I'm very tired, so forgive my tired brain. But that's what I remember. It was like these little lemurs would show up in the dream. well, not even little. There were like sort of like man lemurs and stuff that would show up and lead me to different like visions and things like that. I think that started in like 2009 to they started kind of ending in 2012. It might have been a little bit before that as well.
Yeah, because I recall you had written to me, and then I would find different resonances in your art and what you had said, and I would like tell you and show you illustrations of visions that I had because I had this ayahuasca encounter with these like upright lemurs.
It was
which had these
Lemurians.
Like Lemurians, I called them jokingly because they seemed like this humanoid figures, and it was like there was this one kind of ambassador type with this like long, slender, like Jack Skellington like limbs who like walked up, and the other ones were kind of like hanging in the background like NPCs, just kind of like slightly moving their heads around but like waiting for further instructions or something. And they had this kind of like cyberpunk element where they had these fiber optic hairs with like these little like glowing neon tips at the end. And that was something that you also had.
I also had that
in the same, and you showed me illustrations. So this is the beautiful thing. It wasn't just like here's a psychonaut and an oneronaut who have very meticulously tried to map their encounters. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, with the little glowing tips. Yeah. But it was like Terence McKenna used to say, like, what can you show me? And it's like, here, look at it. Like, let's compare notes.
I found the email, and it was like the piece. I wrote it all over the piece around to show the illustration of the similarity. It seemed undeniable, at least, and there was just it looks like there's a lot more in the email too that was linking other synchronicities that I didn't remember with cicadas, and you mentioned that when he got here. So it was just and I think it just kind of unraveled from there, but so much has happened between that was 2018 and so much has happened between then and now that my memory of it is mud.
For anybody that's interested in like the details of all this stuff, Natalie, aka Loga, was also my first guest when I started my podcast, and we did like a 2.5 hour exploration of her dream chronicles and
multiple personalities, sort of the multiplicity of my masking throughout life that has turned into these there's depth of character to each one, and I go into detail. It's like 2.5 hours or something.
Yeah, it's called the Order of Multiple Personalities, because it was the beauty of it was that it was so organized and cohesive, and that it didn't seem disorderly or possessive in the sense that these things often will be presented.
Right. So tell me more about your time in the jungle.
The recent time.
Sure.
Yeah. So I spent the last 2 years, almost 2 years, living in Mexico in the jungle.
Okay.
And
so this wasn't just a visit.
Well, it started out as a visit. Like this is. So let's go back a few years to like pandemic, because that's something that I think that's kind of like what I call the tuning fork in the road for humanity. You know, like everybody kind of like that din, just like 9/11 did, like that din resounded throughout the world. And so it was really like a time of adjustment. Like I was living in LA, I wasn't happy, I felt isolated, and then COVID came and turned isolation to 11, you know? It's like, now we're all isolated. And I was like, I've been preparing for this. I'm already here. My father, who lives in Florida, he has Alzheimer's, and we have somebody every 3 months. Somebody comes from the Netherlands, a different person, to like take care of him, to like keep him company, make sure he takes his medicine, and that sort of thing. But because of COVID, now the borders were closing down. The person that was there needed to go back. The future was uncertain, so I put all my belongings in storage, and I went to take care of him for 8 months. And then after 8 months, after 6 months or something, it was kind of like, okay, this is starting to wear on me too, you know, because it's like it's hard opening, and it was very rewarding and a beautiful experience, but also it's, you know, sometimes, you know, it's family, like triggers will come up, memories, and now there's no way to like resolve things because it's you know, you're in this whole nother cognitive realm. I like to describe it as like living in his neurodegenerative memory palace.
Right. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Which is, there's beauty to it, because the more of the personality that fades, really just the core remains. And at core, he's just like a really sweet and well-intentioned man, and really
Right.
gentle man. And so that was a really beautiful experience, but it was also like wearing on me, and it was time for me to like get back to like figuring out my life.
Yeah.
So I went back to California. I picked up my car, and I basically went on the Great American Location Scout, as I called it. I went looking for home. I went to places I used to live, and they didn't feel like home. Like driving through San Francisco, where I lived for 10 years, it felt like driving through the smoldering ruins of some like old battleground or something. And I was like, yep, home is not here anymore. And I would just visit homies, trying to find home.
Yeah.
Seeing like who do I want to be close to, maybe where they live is home, but spent some time in Arizona, which was really good, like connecting with the landscape there, because I have like a very strong gravity towards kind of the idea of the genius loci, like the resident spirit of a place. Like I like to create with an environment. I actually did a short film / music video in that desert, where the desert kind of co-created it. At one point on a walk through the desert, there was a face looking up at me from the ground that wasn't a face. It was a piece of a saguaro that had petrified or atrophied, but it looked like a Rorschach face, and it was a perfect mask, and it like gave this to me, which became a mask in this video, where it's like it looks like it's grinning. It's like this strange diabolical Rorschach scarecrow kind of face.
Nice.
And there were moments like that where, like, for instance, like a particular part of the landscape while we were shooting would like light up, like in this perfect fairy sun ray, like where the landscape just lights up and it's like, ah. It's like, okay, quick, get over there, let's shoot this.
Yeah.
So that felt really good, and it started, on this journey, I started kind of like conceptualizing what home would look or feel like. So I wanted community, I wanted to be closer to nature, I wanted to be able to make a bonfire. But I still hadn't found home, I was still just kind of like restless, and then there was a call from a friend who I had met, who had heard me on a podcast. It seems to be like the thread. They heard me on a podcast. They kind of struck through the screen. They were like, hey, you seem cool. I'll be in LA soon. Maybe we can meet up. And we like met up. We got along. We kept in touch. And now she was saying, hey, does anybody want to come create in a snail-shaped house in the jungle in Mexico? And I was working on these snail-shaped house, a spiral, like surreal architecture, this spiral house known as Casa Caracol, the snail house or the shell house or the spiral house.
Interesting.
And I have this thing with snails, like during the lemur episode, my ayahuasca story, I had basically put a coin into the consciousness deposit box and inquired into show me some spirit guides or something. And the first things that showed up were the snails, because in 2004 I wrote this story called The Eternal Snail Convention. Wow, the universe put a coin deposit in there. Oh no, it was just my phone going off. Let me say, what's that? I wrote this story in 2004, and I never published it, I never printed it, I never fully illustrated it. Over time, here and there, one snail illustration at a time, because it works at a snail's pace. But mostly I just kept it memorized, and I would intone it in kind of the bardic oratory storytelling tradition, like at times when it was prompted. And every time I told this story, something would happen. The first time I told it was in a hotel room to a bunch of hippies who stared at me wide-eyed, and I recited it in rhyme. It's a very kind of like Seussical tale.
Okay.
And then one of them reached into their pocket afterwards and pulled out a little snail-shaped finger puppet. And like every time I told the story, something like this would happen. Like it would resonate with people in a certain way. So I knew like this is like a magical gift that I've been given and that I like to pass on.
Sure.
And it's opened doors. And now I was working on some of these illustrations at this time, and here's this invite to a snail-shaped house in the jungle. So I thought, I'll go to Mexico, I'll go for a month, and then I'll come back and figure out this whole looking for home thing. Little did I know I would walk into a situation where I was with very kindred spirits, and little by little, like the darkness of the pandemic and like the avalanche of grief and of just like the uncertainty and the unhappiness was starting to melt away, and I was starting to feel happy. And it was like hard to own up to that at first, because you get these little glimmers, but it's like you don't want to be like, yay, and then get like buried further again. Yeah. But it was like becoming stronger every day. I was feeling more like myself. Like the people that were there, they were very kindred artists, kindred thinkers. They were exploring similar themes. Parts of myself that I had forgotten about were like starting to become amplified and coming back out. And I started feeling myself kind of like coming back into myself. And I started entertaining this idea of like, and they really wanted me to stay there. It was like an artist residency, very informal. But the notion was like, come live here for free, as long as you're creating your art. That's the rule.
Okay.
I need that.
And so
need that someday.
Yeah, I mean, you were
Artist Collective.
It was. I mean, it's still available, I guess. But the dark side, like if you fast forward almost 2 years, is that just as clear as the jungle was that it wanted me there, it was just as clear that it was time to move on when I got infected by a flesh-eating parasite, which explains the lesion on my left cheek and on my right hand. They have since been vanquished. I spent this past Pride Month, I got 20 pricks in the butt. That's injections of glucantine daily.
20 daily?
No. One a day.
Okay, for 20 days. Okay.
For 20 days. Well, for 30 days, I got the weekends off.
Oh, all right.
Praise the Lord. But yeah, so that vanquished them, but the skin is very slow to heal. Like it's been like a month and a half, and it's still not looking very great. So it's a slow process, but I learned a lot from that. Like also as a psychedelic maturation process is how I like to think of it, because I used to look for entities with my head up in space. And then as I got older, I started looking for it in the body. I started like looking for the visions more as like dissociative flights from things that are happening in the body, and the kind of the various collectives and ecologies that live inside us. And then I started recognizing things in the garden, like in my environment. Oh wait, there's so many alien dimensions to the earth, especially living in the jungle. You get to encounter so many miraculous incarnations of this earth, where you're just like one night my girlfriend out there had this great gift for finding creatures that don't formally exist. Like at one point she whistled and I came over and she found this grasshopper nymph that was hanging upside down, crawling out of its own skin very slowly. They do this 5 times in their lifetime till they get to the final size and their final form, but it looked like something from Naked Lunch, from like Cronenberg, like the mugwumps dangling, and like I was working on this book at the time called Impatient Transformations. So then to find this kind of manifestation of that was just like mind-blowing, and just like we were like filming it and staring at it and all this kind of stuff. So I was really like getting interested in kind of the maturation process of like the alien ecology of this earth, and having lived in cities for years, being now in this space where just like tapped into the soundscapes and all the non-human beings with which we cohabitate, until of course the boundary dissolution got very real, and some of them found their way across the boundaries of my skin and into my so basically this is a parasite. It's called leishmania.
Okay.
It's largely due to this deforestation effort, because they're building a railroad across the Yucatan.
That sounds about right.
And the Earth doesn't put a sign out there that says, don't do this or else. Earth is like, F around and find out. You know? So when we found out, so this little sandfly, it's about like a third the size of a mosquito. Some of them carry this parasite, and then when they drink your blood, they deposit the parasite. The parasite gets greeted by your immune cells, and then it just goes sleep, and then it takes the immune cells and wears them like skin, and then propagates inside of it. So, and then you get this, what at first seemed like a bug bite, but got bigger, and then like I tried a Mayan remedy and that didn't work. I did that for 5 weeks, and then I decided, okay, I guess I'll go for the injections. But I thought that was like you go in and you're like, all right, I'll take the injections. And they were like, all right, you're on the list. we'll let you know. So that was another like month and a half of waiting, not knowing how long it was going to be, and yeah, so I'm in the aftermath of that. So that was fast forwarding through the whole time in the jungle.
You had the foreshadowing of a cat with it, though.
It's true. There was a little, the cutest little cat. I called him Little EO. Well, he called himself Little EO because he showed up and he was like, EO, EO, EO. Cute little cat who had some little tumors that kept getting bigger, and he would like shake his head out like a little Cronenbergian lawn sprinkler would like fling blood and pieces of flesh onto the walls, and it was kind of like, he was a cute little horror show. And so we took him to a vet to say like, what's up with his little tumors, you know? So like, what is that? And they were like, well, let's test it. Oh, this is leishmania. And that's where we first learned about this thing.
Could you have gotten it from the cat?
You can't get it directly from the cat. It would the cat was a host, and so it's possible that the little flies fed on it and then carried it on.
Oh, okay.
But there was like at least 5 months between euthanizing the cat and me getting infected and somebody else also getting infected, which it's still possible that it has that long of an incubation period.
Right.
But the cat got it from somewhere too, you know, like it's out there.
So there was nothing you could do to save the cat?
No, there wasn't. I mean, if there was, it would have been costly and time-consuming, and he was really like riddled with it. Like, it was like all over, and it might have even been visceral. So that was a sad chapter in there, but yeah, then it got even sadder when I got it. But luckily, it's not like there's a visceral version, which apparently they don't have out in the Yucatan, is what I was assured of, because that's a potentially lethal case. But in this case, you know, this is a thing too. Like, I consider myself a bardo bard, like a storyteller of liminal spaces, and what often happens is that there are beings that don't have a voice in the world and that need more awareness. So like leishmania is one of these things. So I feel in a way it chose me so as to spread the awareness of these things. I had a similar thing happen with tarantulas. This is in a different jungle.
This is one of my favorite stories.
This is in Peru. There was somebody had gone to the outdoor showers, and they came back and they were like, there's really big tarantulas, like the size of a loofah. Out, and you know, like,
what a comparison.
Yeah. They're like, I almost grabbed the wrong thing, you know, to wash myself with.
Easy mistake to make.
Sudded myself up with the tarantula. And so the shaman is like, okay, claro. And he like goes out there. It was already starting the twilight, so I came with him and I shone a torch, like a flashlight. You know, the English would say torch, but right. A flashlight. And he goes out there with the handle of a broom, and there's like two big, like, hand-sized tarantulas, and he like smacks one of them and it like falls off the wall and it balls up like a fist, you know, on the ground, and the other one got away. And I distinctly remember it felt like, obviously it doesn't have a neck or a head to turn, but it felt like it was pissed off and it was looking at me like, yo. And so 30 minutes later we drank ayahuasca, and it started to come on, and my inner vision becomes wallpapered with tarantulas, and they're encroaching on me, and this one ambassador comes to the foreground, and basically I watch my mind, or like some conception of my mind, like a piece of origami folding itself into the shape of the spider's mind in order to like communicate back and forth, this like trans-dimensional, interspecies diplomacy. And it's basically pissed off, you know. It's like, you stood by in aid of that murder, you shone a light. And I'm like, yo, I'm so sorry, like, we are gringos, we don't know the ecosystem, like, we're stupid, like, it's definitely on us, like, if we would have bumped into you and you would have bitten us, like, that would have been on us, but, you know, this shaman was looking out for us. I know there's like a long-standing respect that has been broken. Like, what can I do? Like, what can I do to make this right? I can tell your story. I can spread awareness of the spiders. And the spider liked this idea so much that it took off its eyes like a crown, and it handed it to me, and it put it on my head like VR goggles. And I saw the world through spider eyes, like a 8-fold kaleidoscope. unified in this like kaleidoscopic vision where the edges were burning with this inhuman firelight, and the actual vision was this almost like slow trailing solarized Tai Chi motion, almost like this other planet, like I was looking at Mars or something. And so to this day, I still speak for the spiders. That's a arachnid raconteur.
So why did the shaman kill him in the first place?
Shamans are humans too. Like, we like to think of them as these like wise men or these superheroes, but
Or at least connected to nature better, where he might just shoot a spider away.
yeah, I think they're not as, I mean, I'm sure there are shamans who are very like, they would just go and the spiders would run off, but a lot of it is like living in that kind of situation. Life and death, the membrane between the two is much thinner, I think. Like, there was an instant, and this is funny because this ties into like an LSD experience I had once, where I was at a festival, and I did LSD maybe like once every 6 years. It wasn't like a regular thing, and it was always this sort of like 12 hours of infinity, that's a lot, you know? And this one night, I'm sitting by this lake, and suddenly the sky opens up, and it's the dawn. And I'm like, it's 2 a.m., how is it the dawn? And the dawn goes, the dawn, and slinks away. And then somewhere else in the sky, the dawn comes. It's almost like this magician, like voguing, like this marquee, the dawn. And I'm like, it's 2 a.m., like, what are you doing? And it would go away again and be like, the dawn. And this kept going on and on. And so I wrote this poem. It's like, all through the night, the sky faked the dawn. The con of dawn, what's going on? And I can't be held accountable for counting insurmountable amounts of stars. Some of them aren't even there. Others burned out long ago. Still on display and on delay. Andale, light years away.
Nice.
So one night in the jungle, there's this rooster who in the middle of the night starts... It's like, it's 2 a.m. There's no way. So this rooster is also like tripping out, and they're the dawn, and the rooster's like, whoa, let me get to work. And this one night, the rooster starts going off, and then it realized its folly. It goes, and the next morning there was rooster stew, because like just like that, the shaman has just got tired of this rooster crowing in the middle of the night, so snapped its neck. And that was breakfast.
Wow.
So there's these moments where you're just like, and you know, like you're going through these ceremonies every other day or something, where you're like going into this space that's supposedly like Bardo or like Vine of the Souls, Vine of the Dead. Right. And so you have this sense of like, you're really close to, like the jungle is so alive and yet so full of death. Death is so close. And then there's also like the shaman was once a soldier, and you see him sitting there in the dark with these like powerful hands that he'll hold out in front of him, and he'll like ball them into fists, and you can hear the knuckles cracking, and the thought comes to mind, it's like hands that could heal, hands that could hurt. It's such a thin line, you know, between medicine and sorcery, between healing and harm. Like it's, you, at least I am like so acutely aware of that liminal space. And in a sense, maybe it's you as the onlooker that's holding the balance. Like it's you yourself. Like there's the healer, and then there's the healee, but both are in kind of like a mutual exchange, you know? Like they're both doing equal amounts of work in that, or carrying equal amounts of responsibility.
How many different hallucinogens have you done?
I could count them on both hands. You know, there's like, I've definitely, the basics, you know, like mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, LSD. I did 2CB a couple of times.
Not sure what that is.
It's like a research chemical. They say it's kind of like synthetic mescaline, or like a mix between like LSD and MDMA. Okay. MDMA, I guess, doesn't count as a hallucinogen, but I've tried it a couple of times. Salvia divinorum, that was one at some point. That was interesting. Amanita muscaria, though I wouldn't necessarily call it a hallucinogen. It was like more like a clear drunkenness, but I'm naturally susceptible to I have a vivid imagination, so visions can prompt themselves even on a cup of chamomile tea if necessary.
Okay. What do you think gels with you the most?
It really depends on different times. Like, in the last year, this particular kind of LSD that I got to do somewhat regularly, I really enjoyed because it felt very manageable. I felt like oftentimes with mushrooms, it's like it becomes a bodily confusion that takes over, where it could take me like 20 minutes to figure out that I need to take a dump. It's like, oh, it's just that, whereas like on this acid, it would be like, oh, something is shifting. I must unload my bowels, like things like that. Ayahuasca has been like an amazing teacher, especially like in my 20s, because I kind of got there early, like in 2003 is when I was introduced to it, and it was like very much like a growth portal for myself. But I'm not like, don't get me wrong, I'm not like a casual psychedelics taker. I don't do it in social settings. I don't do it often, but I always get a lot out of it. Like, it's definitely been...
That's probably because you don't do it often.
Probably, and because I take it very seriously.
Yeah.
Like every experience, I could probably recount every experience I've had, or I've been able to mine some insight or artwork or writing or something from it,
I was trying to describe to somebody recently that the approach is everything when you do any kind of psychedelic. It really makes or breaks the experience.
Yeah, for me also, I think of it as like a VR experience, but as vegetal reality, where you put on the introspectacles, which are like the leaf-shaped lenses of the plant, and you get to see through the plant's eyes in a way, just like with the spiders, you put
Right.
But that's what a plant does, right? Like, it photosynthesizes, so there's this synthetic light that plays out a kind of simulation through which you can, somewhere on the intersection of the virtual and the spiritual, you get to experience your hopes, your fears, your dreams, your, kind of like a virtual playground or a virtual battleground where you get to work out in a safe container. You get to safely suffer, and you get to safely enjoy the rewards of, just like in a dream space, as Natalie is very well aware of as an avid dreamer, that you get to work through things and actually gain experience without ever having to go anywhere.
Right.
And then you can come out of that feeling clearer, or... because it used to be, like I said, like I was much more with my head up in space with it. Mm-hmm. And as my maturation process happened over time, there was one instance with ayahuasca where it like opened up the veils, and there's like the astral plane gridded before you with little planets like submerged like ice cream scoops in the distance, and it's like, shall we venture onwards? And I'm like, well, actually kind of need to like work on some practical things around here. And then she closes the curtain. It's like, fine, let's look at that. It's like the genie in the bottle. It's like, whatever your wish is my command. Let's work on what you got to work with. So it's been much more about like grounding things out, finding, I guess, what you'd call practical magic. It's like finding the enchantment, but applying it in integrated and practical ways in everyday life.
I don't think I've ever asked you this. Have we talked about this? Did I ever ask you about Belladonna?
I don't know if we've talked
It's not,
about
obviously,
Belladonna.
It's not a popular psychedelic, but I don't know if you've had any experience or known anyone who has.
I've known somebody who has. And who had
that?
Great story. So this is a great story.
What's the drug, first of all?
So, Belladonna, it's with you.
Oh, Belladonna. Okay.
Yeah.
Belladonna, yeah.
For some reason, I heard Villadonna.
No. Belladonna. I mean, it's a nightshade. Does it fall in the nightshade
it's
category?
Poisonous.
Yeah.
Highly toxic.
Highly
nightshade.
toxic, deliriant.
Yeah.
I worked in the early 2000s in a pawn shop in South Florida, and one of my coworkers was a great storyteller who had done a lot of drugs. And at one point he told me about Belladonna, and they had brewed up like a big Coke bottle full of Belladonna tea, and they would drink it, and he was like, yeah, man, I'd like sitting there and I'd be eating this bag of chips and you could feel the grease on your fingers and the crinkly mirrored inside of the bag. But every time you'd lift it, when it reached your lips, there were no chips. But you couldn't stop eating them. He's like, same thing, smoking cigarettes, get to your lips, you'd be like, oh, man. Nothing there, you know? So he's like, so I'm sitting in this car and I'm eating these chips that don't exist and smoking these cigarettes that don't exist, and my friend Mike shows up and he knocks on the window and I roll the window down and Mike goes, hey man, I just scored $300 worth of crack. Do you want to smoke this with me? And he goes, no man, I'm drinking this Belladonna tea and I keep eating these, he brings the chips to his lips, eating these, man, these chips that don't exist. And he's like, and my friend Mike was out of town that week. So it's like, it's extremely delirious where you can't discern, just like with, I guess classically what they would say about datura, like if what I had in the jungle that time was indeed Toei or datura, it wasn't to that level of delirium, but what had happened to me at some point was there was a regression in time for about 9 hours that happened to me and a few other participants, but that doesn't mean we were physically time traveling. It was like a cognitive reset. Mm-hmm. And the way that manifested was that earlier in the day, my sister and I had gotten on this little boat across the river to meet this shaman, to see like what it was all about and if we could do a ceremony there that night. And the shaman of the Yagua tribe, he was like sitting next to this like big pile of bananas, and he was just slowly like extinguishing mosquitoes on his leg as though they were little universes he was vanquishing. And we had a translator there, and he seemed very like, he's like, yeah, it's just one plant, takes a few hours to make, it's yahe, but it's not ayahuasca, which, you know, that's like saying you're on Where Did the Road Go, but this is not Soraya, right? This is the host, but this is not Soraya. Like, it doesn't add up.
Okay.
But I was curious because the way he described it, he's like, yeah, you can like astral travel on it and it's for healing and all these. The things he was describing sounded like my ayahuasca experiences, and I wanted to share that with my sister. So I was like, well, let's try it out. But I wanted to, like, there's a part of me that wanted to impress this shaman or something, so I wanted to bring my didgeridoo, but I'd forgotten it. So I was like, I'll bring it tonight. And so for the ceremony, I did bring it over, and I played it at some point, and at some point in the middle of it, my sister and I are standing by the riverbank at night. She's feeling really nauseous. I call it hypnausea, because it was like a hypnotic nausea that would like overcome, where like space seemed very discombobulated and non-Euclidean in a way. There were like moments when I would like sit back and feel like I was falling back 10 miles into a void or something, but it was really just, you know. And so we're staring at the sky where we had in the daytime gone like rowing on the river at sunset, and you'd see these little swells on the water, and you'd kind of guess like where the pink dolphins would breach the surface. Pink dolphins sounds really romantic, but they kind of look like dolphins with vitiligo, like just like their skin is kind of like blotchy with pink spots. But it was kind of a magical thing because at sunset the sky is pink, the clouds are pink dolphins, it's just like pink, 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 you know. But at night we were like looking in the sky and there were like shooting stars, and it was kind of like, now we're looking for pink dolphins in the sky. And then the little shaman guy came up with his unibrow, and he looked kind of like a mix between Frida Kahlo and Rumpelstiltskin. And he came up and he goes, and I was like, what does he want? She's like, I think he wants you to play the didgeridoo. And I was like, yeah, maybe in a little bit. And he's like, and I was like, all right, I'll go in and play the didgeridoo for him. But then on the way back, we had brought these British kids that were in the resort with us, and we were like, we're on a ceremony, you want to come with us? And they came along, and they were like, one of them was like trying to grab the life vest, they thought it was their suitcase, another one was trying to take a picture with a water bottle. And then in the boat, this one guy, he starts looking through his hand, he's like standing up, and they're like, sit down, Jamie, you have to sit down, it's dangerous. And he's like, I'm looking for the oar. He's like raking his finger through his hand. I'm looking for the oar. They're like, we're not in the rowboats anymore, that was 9 hours ago. And in the meantime, my mind is dissociating into space where like the universe above me, like the stars, the sky, are like a universe of sadness because I forgot my didgeridoo.
I forgot my didgeridoo. I guess I'll have to get it tomorrow, but I was so sad that I'd forgotten it. And we arrive at the place, and I just grab it because it was next to me the whole time and went on with it. But in that moment, later I looked at it, I was like, that was 9 hours ago that I forgot the didgeridoo. That was 9 hours ago that he was in the boat. So this really weird, like, cognitive time reset.
Interesting.
Every time you tell me about that I'm looking for the or part, I lose it. I don't know why that's so funny to me.
Well, then the funniest part is we get back to the resort, and there's this one area that's kind of like the dining room, mess hall, and there were some other people there. There was this French woman and some, I don't know, other people from other places. And so we're walking in there, and we sit down at the table, and I'm under the impression that the boat is getting prepped for us to go to the shaman's place. We just came back, mind you, right? And I'm sitting there, and I'm just waiting for somebody to go like, all right, we're ready to go. And they're kind of like chatting a little bit. And all of a sudden, the French woman looks over at me, and she goes, do you have answers? I'm like, what? Do you have answers? I'm like, I don't know what the question is. You went to the ceremony. Do you have answers? And I look over at the others, and I'm like, are we leaving or not? They're like, we just got back. And I'm like, I'm going to bed. So it was disorienting. And the next morning still, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and just feeling this like brujeria, you know, this like witchcraft, like Amazonian witchcraft kind of feeling. I was like, well, that definitely wasn't ayahuasca. Whatever it was very disorienting. Probably Toei. Definitely not Belladonna. But yeah, that was a mystery sidestep.
Well, I had to ask because did I tell you that technically my first trip was Belladonna at the age of 3?
What?
Whoa.
It's not something I'm surprised I haven't told you. I don't really tell anybody because I don't know how to. It's a strange story because I mean I was a toddler, so.
So you brewed up some Belladonna.
You know, as you do when you're 3 years old, you're
The old tea
experimenting
parties.
with, you know, I had a choice of psychedelics, and I was like, no, because I've always had weird eye issues. I was, born that way. It was astigmatism and a bunch of weird stuff. So I routinely had to go see an ophthalmologist, and this was in like the old part of Minneapolis, so it was kind of an old school sort of ophthalmologist, and we didn't know until it was too late that he'd used Belladonna to dilate my pupils. And it didn't hit right away.
Was that a regular medicine that they used for this?
So
really?
apparently they used to use it regularly. So this was early 80s or mid 80s, probably around 85 because I was 3. I'm trying to remember when that was, but my parents just assumed they were using the. I'm not sure what the chemical is now. I forget every time I try to think of it, but they just assumed they were using the standard that had come out by then. But this ophthalmologist was still using the old Belladonna drops that they'd been using, I think, since like the 20s or something like that. It's a very old concoction that is known to cause certain people, especially sensitive people, to have symptoms. So, but for some reason it was delayed. I don't think I had anything immediately happen to me. It wasn't until that like later in like early morning and then into the mid morning. So probably maybe 12 hours after I had seen this doctor. And I woke up, sort of, I don't remember the just to be clear, I had eidetic memory back when I was, a little kid. It started fading around like adolescence, but everything is like still clear in my memory. So that's why I can speak of it the way I can. But I remember where we were living, and I remember where I was lying and how I woke up and everything, because I wasn't waking up completely. I wasn't waking out of my dream. I was in this state of, I was 3. I had no idea what was happening to me. I had no way to describe this sort of psychotic experience I was having. It was very dissociated, but also going into my body. I was able to see the valves of my heart working. Wow. I was seeing my heart pumping because I had tachycardia from the effects of the Belladonna. Like it was hitting. I had this horrible headache. Like I had all these weird symptoms going on, but it was like my body was sort of like sending me on this like inner journey.
Wow.
In a way a child should never experience their body.
Yeah.
And I went into, that was the first panic attack I've ever had, because I was just absolutely terrified out of my mind, and I started screaming for my dad. Because what else are you going to do? But I couldn't stop seeing it, whether my eyes were closed or open. All I could see was the inner workings of my body all at once, like this overwhelming sense of everything that was happening to me in a way that I couldn't describe to my dad when he came, up, and he didn't know what to do. His little kid daughters all talking about the things that are working, and I was able to point them all out when we went to a doctor's appointment. I was like, yeah, it was like this. It was these parts here in my heart, but it
Where
looked
did
like
the
this
Belladonna
and that.
touch you?
But it was so much more than that, because it was that indescribable experience with it, like that sort of aura that comes with the experience. It was like a dream, but I was still awake, and I was unable to get myself out of it, while also seeing like these intricate parts of my body, because my body was freaking out. It was a poison,
Yeah, I can relate to that in a way through like fever dreams when I was a child, and also there were certain recurring visions that I would have that would make me feel like out of control. It would be like the image of two identical limousines where the doors didn't line up. They were identical, but it was like impossible, almost like a Escher-like
That
thing.
is such such a weird thing that kids get. Yeah, I used to get stuff. I can't think of anything specific like that.
Swing,
but yeah.
like a swing that's going round and round and round, and I couldn't stop it with my mind. I'd be like, no, stop it, and
I
it would
used to
like
get
keep
stuff like
going.
that, yeah.
Or this image that I associated with nausea, or if I'd get sick, it'd be these like really stringy arms, like stringy fingers holding like a lung or like a piece of like a vital organ or something that was too heavy
that sounds
for these
familiar, that kind of thing.
like those kinds of bodily kind of like anomalous imageries where just like I mean, it's kind of come back to like Cronenberg, like that body horror kind of
surreal
vibe. Yeah, surreal and cerebral, and
it was like that, but it was
fleshy and
because I used to
stringy.
get stuff like that. Now that you mentioned it, I'm gonna have to think about that, because I know I had stuff like that sort of fever dream, like abstraction, like your body's trying to work out what's wrong with it and also heal, and then it's being human, you start to try to come up with like correlates or whatever.
Yeah, maybe it's like, because I think of this in psychedelic space, like the visions or the visuals that people get are like a custom language that the body concocts in order to like portray something or relay something to your psychology. Like a lot of times it's like the body is trying to tell you something, but we can't decipher it, or it's like
it uses like jangled symbols, especially when you're a kid
and you don't even know like.
And you haven't gotten it all, like by the time we're adults, so we've kind of got our symbols worked out. That's just part of us now. But like when you're a kid, you're still working it out. And there's these weird like associations, like who knows where you got the association with limos. Yeah,
that's so weird. But like for instance, like that woman from the TED Talk, The Stroke of Genius, was like a neuroscientist that had a stroke and could watch it all from the inside because she knew which parts are being affected and what's happening. Yeah. Like as a kid, you don't have that.
Jill Bolt, I think her name is.
Yeah. As a kid, you're just like in this, you're like Adam in the garden before anything is named. You're like...
Your brains too, just like those weird interconnections that you're making as a kid is very synesthetic.
Yeah.
But this was the opposite of that. It was like extreme clarity of what was going on in my body. I didn't know anatomy. I didn't understand any of that, but it blew my mind when we went to a clinic visit maybe like a year later, and they had the cross-section of the heart and the valves and everything like that, and I started panicking because I was seeing what I'd seen in my dream, except for, it was very fleshy and bloody and gross and whatever in the not dream, but the psychedelic vision. Yeah. But, it was like this clean... clinical cross-section of a heart, and I started panicking. I couldn't even be in the room because...
Well, what's trippy, because before we started recording, the three of us were kind of talking about Eric Wargo and precognition and time loops.
Oh, yeah.
And the notion that, like he puts forth this idea, for instance, if you have a precognition of something in a dream, a lot of times it's a precognition of something that you'll read or encounter later on. So, for instance, you have a dream about a tiger, and then afterwards you look up symbolism for the tiger,
Right.
and then that influences the dream in a
Yeah.
retrocausal act. So in a sense, maybe you seeing the chart in the doctor's office is what retrocausally caused that integral vision. And
Possibly,
that's like the time loop.
but it was still I didn't like it because it was inaccurate to what I saw, because it was a drawing, and what I had seen was flesh and real. You know what I mean? It was like 3-dimensional parts of my body functioning and like my heart pounding. So I was able to see like I was seeing like the valves look weird from the top, like the kind of like gaping and closing and gaping, and it was just like in this extreme kind of like House MD detail.
Yeah,
it was kind of like this traveling through my body, but I couldn't stop it. But it was like my body in that sort of altered state was also trying to tell me it was in danger, and it was just doing it so vividly that I was unable to shut that out. And my dad came up and he grabs me and he had me stand up, and I was able to like function and stuff. So he had me follow him closely down the stairs, and he's all, he didn't know what to do. He's like, all right, I'll get you some Lucky Charms. I'm like, I do not want to eat right now.
Bring you back to your senses with some sugary.
We gotta take a quick break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. First, some contact info, and then a recommendation. If you want to contact me, it's contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com. In fact, if you go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, you will find emails for where to send stories, this email, my snail mail address, links to all our social media, how to become a Patreon for only $3 a month, get extra content all month long, and every show back to the very first one over 10 years ago. So, as for recommendation this week, I am going to recommend a game, not something I usually do. I'm going to recommend Oxenfree. Oxenfree is an interesting game, I think, out for all the major systems. It came out quite a few years ago, maybe 2016 or something like that. I've probably mentioned it on the show before. It's sort of a choose your path type of game. So there's not a lot of action or anything like that, but it has some really cool concepts in it. And in a way, it feels like it might be how our universe really works. Like as you play the game, you have to say and react to different things. And you only have so many choices, even though it seems like you have plenty of choices. The paths only vary slightly depending on the choices you make. But it's interesting because it's also a time loop. And so it has some really neat stuff with radio frequencies and things like that. And I bring it up now because they just released Oxenfree 2. And I finally got through the whole game. Neither of these games are particularly long. I think maybe 3 hours or so. And Oxenfree 2 is okay. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed. But it may actually, some people may prefer the second one. I don't know. The first one you're playing as like a late teen with her friends and some early 20s, like her older brother's ex-girlfriend, stuff like that. So it's that sort of a feel, whereas this new one is a middle-aged, you're playing as a middle-aged woman, and there's only one other character you're mostly interacting with through the whole game, who is a middle-aged man. And I don't know, it loses something of the flavor that the first one had, I think, because of that. I don't know, it's like, I can't really explain what put my finger on it, but the concepts and stuff are still very cool. This one brings out the idea of a cult around all the weird stuff happening, and the story on both of them are it's good. It's good. I just think I prefer the first one over the second one. And the second one took so long to come out. So long to come out. It was really frustrating because it just kept lingering. The company that made it got bought up by Netflix. And it is out for everything, I think, but Xbox, which is weird. But they say eventually it's going to come out for Xbox. I got it on Steam. It was really cheap. So, yeah, that's my recommendation. Oxenfree and Oxenfree 2. Definitely worth the play just for the story, but like I said, it's not action-oriented at all, so, it's mostly kind of just choosing your path as you go. All right, we'll be back to the show right after this.
Looking for something to do after Halloween is over? Are you into the strange, bizarre, and unusual? On November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, the Strange Realities Conference is coming back to Nashville, Tennessee, and streaming online. Come join us for 3 days exploring mysteries, supernatural, the occult, weird history, and more, featuring lectures, presentations, and workshops by Tim Banal, Zach Hunt, Cheslin Vance, Bryn Collier, Tobias Whalen, Brent Rains, Joshua Cutchin, Kiki Dombrowski, Recluse, Nathan Isaac, Christopher Ernst, Aaron Gulius, David Metcalf, Timothy Renner, Mallory Sawinski, Soraya Ascap, and special guest Steve Berg as your Master of Ceremonies. Make sure to join us for the fun and informative weekend online and at SIR Nashville November 3rd and 4th and online only November 5th. Tickets are available at strangerealitiesconference.com.
So we're here with Natalie and the Ungooglable Michelangelo. I actually got that word out. All right.
Nice.
And you can continue if you want, Natalie.
So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, it was just kind of sweet of
Lucky
my dad
Charms.
because he well it was kind of helpful because it was like he kind of knew what to do in a way. He was like, all right, we're just gonna have a normal breakfast. We're gonna ground you in this moment, and I'm really grateful to him for that because my mom wasn't there. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't call her and be like, what do I do? Our kid's freaking out on a psychedelic trip. I don't. But he also understood. Both of them did. They knew what was happening. They're like, they called the officer. My mom was furious. She's like, "Did you? What are on those drops?" And then they told her, and she's like, "I knew it." And she was just furious, and she was like threatening to I don't think they used them past that point because she said what I was experiencing, and they didn't know if they should take me to the ER or what. But it did start to pass. It faded within an hour or so.
So are you dead now?
I have no idea.
Okay.
But I do think that had some effect on me going forward.
Oh, probably, yeah.
Like a permanent stain on my brain in a way. I think that was sort of a pivotal moment because after that,
initiation in a way.
Well, I also had vivid dreams before that and stuff, but I can't imagine that it really, dissuaded those. So I never forgot. Even thinking about it now, I see those visions like they just happened.
Yeah,
like they really got into my neurons and just stayed there. And that was part of my fascination with anatomy and understanding the human body. After that was just wow, is this something that you can experience? Is this, I don't know, becoming more. After that, I don't know. I think that might have been the point when I became really interoceptive. I just became very hyper aware of everything in my body, its placement and what it was, and so it was very important to me to learn the names of those things and be able to identify them. Which
is interesting because that's the same thing that happened with your psychic space in a way, the different encounters of characters in your dreams, and then it's well, I better get to know their names and get to know them better if this is something I'm going to live with. This is a part of my body and my mind. And my first approach was that this is, just seeing my heart. This has to be a part of my mind, my brain, and I need to understand that. But in so doing, it seems like I also met things that were not necessarily part of me, but transient visitors and that kind of thing. And that's what freaked me out. Yeah. Well, I think that's similar to what I was saying about being a bardo bard, is that there are things that I came up with the term recently in New York, the folklorax. I speak for the folklore. So there's there are things that everything wants to be acknowledged and seen and heard. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have a gift with language and with imagery and things like that, so it makes sense for things to come through and find these hosts in a way and want to inspire. That's their gift to you. It's here's some inspiration, but on the other hand, it's also you have to ghost bust them. You know what I mean? It's embarrassing to talk about this, but back in 2011 when I really started going into it, when I was seeing sort of potential evidence for these things having an external origin, there was one in particular who I had been encountering in dreams and would occasionally encounter when I would talk to him. He, at one point, it had been a few months at that point, I was like, well, why do you keep coming back? And he's like,
because I don't remember how he phrased it. I really wish I had it in front of me, but it was something like, because you're so meticulous and methodical about this, and like you're trying to figure it out and stuff. So he's like, maybe you can figure out me. Maybe you can figure out who I am, because I don't remember that well. And it was kind of like this heartbreaking moment. I'm like, I don't know if this is me, or if this does have some sort of external origin, but it was upsetting in a way, because I'm like, this is, I don't know, and I don't know if I should go forward with something like that. I don't know, like that existentially.
Well, that's why I feel like the ghost busting element, like if you render this being in a drawing or something like that, like now there is an acknowledgement of it, there is a mapping of it, and yet it's now, just like what we were talking about with the bicameral mind, like the voice in the head, which had to be obeyed, is now like written on a tablet, is now like a face looking at you from a page. So it's now separated from you in a way. Of course, they'll probably still recur in dreams. They're like, I really like that portrait. Can we do another one? Let me pose for you, Because like you had those beings, the drie, I think you called them, which was the Dutch word for three, which is interesting. Although it's spelled slightly different.
Or drie. Well, I learned later it was Old English for suffer. Suffer, what? Like suffer your fate, dree one's fate.
Wow.
Suffer. Yeah.
Like that's what's so interesting to me about these realms, is that you have an experience that's like a raw, original experience, and then there's so many questions that come from that encounter with that mystery that you want to learn more, and in your effort of plowing through the databases of culture, you kind of find this, you call it a skein of association, but might as well be a skin of associations that you like wrap around this mystery, where now all of a sudden there's like Old English influences or like Fey folklore that comes into it.
And the three, because there were three entities at any given time. There's sort of like like the fates. It was fate, kind of like that sort of. Yeah, I mean
that's Fey too. Fey and fate. Those words are
exactly.
Are
and it's just strange because it was only like 2.5 when that was happening, So it wasn't like I could.
That's so wild.
Even unconsciously start to wrap that up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like an encounter with the what do they call it? It's the three fate in Norse folklore. Why am I drawing a blank? They're the ones that decide
like Macbeth,
fate.
The ones in Macbeth.
Are they? They might be.
They share
based
one
on
eye.
them.
Are they the ones that weave like the threads and stuff?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I forget the name.
Aren't they just called the Fates?
They might be.
No.
Oh, the Furies?
Norns.
Norns?
They're the three Norns
I knew that.
Yeah, so like it made me think of that because it was always kind of like this recurring theme of three entities. And then, the whole dream. But I was screaming Dree over and over and over again. And I've had a few dreams where, I mean, I don't want to make wild claims, but it seems like Old English comes up in dreams multiple times. Just words that fit perfectly with, Old English phrases and that kind of thing. So, but again, I was only 2.5 years old. I'd had no exposure to that. Nobody knew what was going on. But that's why I say I know the Belladonna wasn't what made me a weird kid.
Oh, right.
You don't want to give Belladonna eye drops to a kid that's already going through that.
I mean, maybe that was like an initiation that later on opened you up further to these things.
So, as we're starting to run out of time here, how did you end up coming to New York? Well, I mean, obviously you got a flesh-eating virus.
Flesh-eating parasites definitely, put a...
And you said, what's the opposite of where I am now?
Yeah. So the first thing I did is I landed in Miami because my dad needed... We had a little bridge between caretakers for a couple weeks, so I thought that was a good place to land. Air conditioning, all that stuff, the luxuries of the modern world. And then I was preparing for this show in New York. So this is kind of interesting because while I was in the jungle, I was approached by this comedian, Shane Moss, who wanted an introduction to his new comedy show called A Better Trip that he's touring with right now. And he wanted Terence McKenna introduction, and I'm the world's foremost Terence McKenna impersonator. So he hired me to do this introduction where it's Terence as a bard in the bardo broadcasting from the bodiless beyond. And he performed this show with this intro at a place called the Athenaeum in New York City, which is the first psychedelic library and social club and event space that's fully member supported in Midtown Manhattan. And the two girls, Kat and Susie, who run this place, two women I should say, the two women who run this place, heard this, and they were huge McKenna fans, and they were like, what is that? How, what, who? And he was like, oh, it's this guy, the Ungooglable Michelangelo. So they reached out to me and commissioned me to write and narrate a Terence McKenna voiceover to tell the origin story and the mission statement of this business, which you can find on YouTube if you look up Psychedelic Athenaeum or Psychedelic Assembly, which is the name of their company. And so I did that with them, and then as part of that too, we started talking about putting on an art show in their space, because I had all this artwork that I'd been making in the jungle that I wanted to share with the world, and I wanted to do like a storytelling performance.
What format of art?
So these are paintings.
Okay.
And I use this technique called pareidolia, which the word pareidolia is just the tendency for perception to find meaningful patterns in random stimuli, like faces in the clouds, Jesus on toast, that sort of thing.
No, those are real.
Yeah. Well, that's called pareidolatry, is what I call that, when you believe that that's actually Jesus on toast. So I ended up putting a lot of these pieces, which I call divined designs. And I did a presentation where for 2 hours straight I talked about the adventures and ideas behind the creation of these pieces, and like this whole kind of the philosophy of pareidolia as a daemonic interface. So using this technique as a way to kind of prompt the unconscious or the disowned and estranged parts of the self to the foreground, and then tracing them into these forms. Because if you look at the artwork, and you can probably, we can maybe put a link somewhere for people to look at some stuff. It's full of characters. Like
Is it linked on your page?
I don't think I have a lot of these new pieces up there, but if you go to my Instagram, for instance, which is at void_denizen, VOID_DENIZEN.
Nice.
Or theungooglable.com is where you can find all the links and everything. A lot of these pieces are, I don't know what I was going to say, but it's like the estranged parts of the self like come to the forefront. So it's peopled with all these different characters and personalities, where we think of ourselves as this seemingly singular self, as a lot of the stories we've been sharing here reveal, is that we're made up of entire ecologies, biological ecologies of organisms, microorganisms, but also like psychological ecologies, like the voice in our head that is supposedly us is also a conglomeration of, influences, parents, education, all this stuff, and it kind of like gets clumped together under this singular source. So in a way, this artwork just shows the multitudes I contain / we contain, because it becomes this mirror for all these weird and sometimes funny and sometimes perverted assemblies of personalities. So I got to share that, and I got to share the stories behind it, and I'm spending the rest of the month in New York and looking for more opportunities to like share adventures and stories and art. Yeah.
And you're talking New York City.
New York City. And right now I had the opportunity to come visit you and step outside for a second and hear the cricket choirs again, which is, I think it's important, because as much as I love the human pulse of the city, and the city is a ceremony, like you're in it, and it's just like the self-intersecting ego geometries of humanity folded in on itself is very inspiring and good for writing. But it's so important to come back to the cricket silence of nature.
I can't stand the city, honestly.
No, I don't blame you. Like, I find it very exciting to visit, but I know that if I would live there, I would need a lot. Like, it's like my phone that needs to be charged more. I'd need a lot more recharging time.
Yeah.
Like right now, I can ride high on it, but
well, you've been in the jungle for a few years.
Yeah, that too. I haven't had that much social interaction. It was my my girlfriend and I were there for a year and a half where it was mostly the two of us, and then some people would come through. But so right now I'm getting really high on just like meeting new people, social interaction, and
Is your girlfriend still there?
no, she's not my ex-girlfriend. I still
okay.
speak of it in the present tense. She moved back to Argentina, where she was from, and she also met me through kind of like a dream portal. Like she had heard me on a podcast, and then reached out to me, and we corresponded for a moment. It was just like, she was like, "Hey, I feel like you're a friend I haven't met yet," and so I wrote back. And then she had a dream, and she wrote me about this dream where we were sailing the ship through a storm and navigating it towards safety. And this was right at a time that this kind of energetic tempest had moved through the snail house, where the water didn't work the next day, the toilet wouldn't flush, the car wouldn't start, this kind of thing. So I was like, when was this dream? This was last night? She was like, yeah. So I was like, that's interesting.
Oh.
And then I invited her to meet for this gathering we were having elsewhere in another jungle in Mexico, in a rainforest, and she came over, and we were together from that moment until she moved back to Argentina. So, but we're still on close terms, and it was an amicable parting.
Good.
But yes, another dream, somebody that orients themselves through their dreams, which I think it's a courageous thing to do, you know, in life, to really like follow those intuitions. But one of the things that motivated her to do it was that she knew she would regret it if she didn't follow this glimmer.
I know that feeling, yeah.
And so, like, I very much live my life that way, where I'm going to follow these intuitions and these little...
Oh, absolutely.
These little...
Even when they're small things.
Yeah, especially if they're small things, because that's like what they call a glimmer, right? Like, it increases the more you focus on it.
You just gotta wonder sometimes if you're just creating that glimmer because you're following it, or if you're actually following something.
Well, that's the time loop logic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's like the glimmer, it's almost like it's you from the future sending yourself a message back in time saying, I'm safe here, follow this. And then when you make it to the point of safety, which the glimmer led you to, it's like the time loop is closed, and then you follow the next one. So it's like our way of orienting through time. And I resonate with it because it's gotten me this far, and I'm still alive. I may be, I may be being eaten alive by parasites at some point in there, but I mean, it makes for a rich life, I think. There's worse things that could have...
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Befall one. Yeah.
I mean, because dreams are one of the things that have navigated me through life.
Yeah.
Usually toward people.
Yeah.
So I'll dream about someone. It's not even that I dream about someone. I get literal information about someone.
Interesting.
In a dream state. So it's not I'm dreaming about something that's going to happen. This is where Wargo and I kind of were differing a bit, because, I mean, as far as 6 years ahead, I was told specific information about someone.
But then the question that probably Wargo asked you too is, did that information get confirmed by them later on? Because if that's the case, then that's where in his mind.
I'm not saying, but he was focused very much on things being like 2 or 3 days ahead.
Oh, I've heard him say too that sometimes it's like to the day, like 10 years in the future, things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're that at odds with him.
Well, he's shifted, I think, a little bit.
That's also possible, yeah.
Because he was very in time loops. He's very set on the idea that most of these things happen 2 or 3 days precognitive.
I see.
And I'm going. I got some that are at least 6 years out, possibly more.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm not dreaming about something that happens. I'm being given very specific information.
Yeah.
More than half of mine are driving me away from things that are dangerous.
Okay.
And only a few of those ever get fully, confirmed. So a lot of them I just go, I believe, because those other ones were confirmed. So it doesn't necessarily have a loop back.
Yeah.
It just is something I went with because I knew.
Different part of the multiverse.
It's like based on those other ones, I know that feeling is almost certainly correct, and that I need to avoid the thing that.
So instead of showing you where to go, it's showing you where not to go.
Yeah. Well, it's showing me the danger, and then I can evade that danger. And whether it's confirmed or not is kind of moot to me, because the other ones were confirmed, and it's the same feeling. So it's safer to just err on the side of caution.
Well, I really like the element of, because we think of dreams as almost like a non-biological element, right? It's like a psychological or a spiritual dimension. But by thinking of these things as orienting us through time towards safety and survival, it brings it back to the animal element, the animal body, and the survivalist earthbound terrain, which I find very satisfying in a way.
Trying to maintain this form.
Yeah.
For as long as
possible.
possible.
So that we can continue dreaming.
Yeah.
It's very self-interested too, the dream realm. It's like, if you don't have the body intact, we can't dream.
When you were talking to Nathan he was talking about how God is just basically wants those moments of, wow, how did he put it?
How did he put it?
He put it so perfectly.
It's an Alfred North Whitehead thing that he was touching onto. This is Nathan Dufour, aka Nathanology. He said, God in the like Whiteheadian sense, I don't know how to conceptualize that entirely, but think of that however you want. Life, the universe, whatever, likes localized intensities of experience.
That really resonated with me.
And so he was relating that to my parasitic thing. He's like, here's this single cellular thing thriving or like vying for survival against you, multicellular being who doesn't really want that, but it's making for an intensity of experience
drama
that the gods just kind of go like, oh, it is a good show.
That's what it feels like. That immediately just struck me.
Yeah.
Like, that was so.
And that's
clear.
The idea. I mean, I mentioned like the idea of the folklorax. I have this thing, like one of my, if I could find a purpose of why we're here, I think it's to serve the lore, praise the lore, because we're all made of this, or embedded in this fabric of story, right? This like storied fabric of humanity, stories we share, and that's where that resonates for me. Is like that God or the observer or whatever that part is that gets to enjoy this experience beyond the duality of the attraction and aversion and the good and the bad and the suffering and the pleasures, that part just likes a good story.
Yep.
Praise the Lord.
Nice. All right. Well, we are almost out of time. Tell people where they can find you again and the name of your podcast.
Yes. Please visit www.theungoogleable.com. And that's where you can also find my Instagram, my Twitter. Do we call it X? No.
I don't know. No.
We call it Twitter.
Why would you take a brand that is literally part of the language and change its name?
I think he should change his name to Elon Musk. That's the safest bet. But anyway, theungoogleable.com, that's where you find all the links. And then my podcast is called Self-Portraits as Other People, which you can find wherever pods are cast, at your local podcastle, wherever that may be.
And anything else that people should know about?
So I have a book. Actually, I have two books, but one of them is the most recent one that I briefly mentioned, Impatient Transformations, and there's only 300 copies in existence, and you can get that on my site as well, which is like wordplay and artwork and a trippy little tome. So check that out, and if you're in New York City for this month,
which is August, September?
Yep, August into, I think, September 3rd is when we're going to take it down. You can come to the Athenaeum in Midtown Manhattan on 222 46th Avenue and come check out a really cool space that's kind of like through the looking glass out of the city in the psychedelic library, and you can check out some of my artwork there. And if you're not in New York City, check out my artwork online. Feast your eyes and ears and other senses.
And Natalie, where can people find you?
Well, did you still have the he and she of it available?
That one is still, there's still some copies of it.
I have an illustration in that, if anybody's interested in that.
A dope illustration.
I really don't have much presence online currently, but at Eorhythm is where you'll find me, or Motley Crew.
And what's the thing you just said you're in?
He and She of It is a book, his other book. It's a poetry book that's illustrated by different people. It's
not about gender theory, as some people might think. The He and the She of It was a book of little poetic verses, and I got, during the pandemic, 35 artists to collaborate on illustrations. So they each take a verse and illustrate it. And Natalie's illustration is super dope and super on brand for your oneric.
I'm glad it fits so well.
style. Yeah, no, it's a super sick piece.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Billuminati, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Tim, Matthew Sproul, Andrew Nichols, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin, CJ, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Wesley, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Dellor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Treewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, A Crocodile, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very, very much. So since the Ungooglable one was here, he'll be joining us on next week's show as well. And we did some Patreon stuff, walking around some cemeteries in Ithaca. So that'll be up for patrons. And like I said, he'll also be on next week's show. Definitely check out his stuff. He's an interesting guy, and I will most likely have him back. All right. I wanted to give a shout out to a few new patrons: Jacob Kassler, Purito Kitten, Chris Reese, and CJ. Thank you all for joining up. I hope you enjoyed the extra content. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.